Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Fretworks. And this week we're taking a look at the absolute worst, or best, thing that you could ever do to a Les Paul. And that is of course top wrapping. Now, if you've ever been on any of the Les Paul forums or Facebook groups, you know that the great top wrapping debate rages on still today and is one of the most hotly contested subjects that you could possibly ever dare to bring up in the digital realm. People either love it, or as is their way online, absolutely loathe it. Now, I've done a video in the past taking a look at whether there are any perceptible differences in tone, sound or sustain between top wrapping and the more traditional method, but today's video is going to be taking a more objective look at the theory and the kind of practice, hopefully getting to the bottom of where it came from, and ultimately why even mentioning it is the kind of tone talk equivalent of throwing a live grenade and then running away. So what is top wrapping? As the name suggests, it is the practice of wrapping the strings over the top of your tailpiece as opposed to through on any Gibson style guitar with a dedicated tunematic and stop bar tailpiece. Now naysayers are very quick to point out that this kind of practice, or whatever you want to call it, has only really seemed to have become popular since the advent of the internet. However, working roughly in reverse chronological order, we can see that Joe Bonamassa is clearly a big fan, as is Zakk Wylde, as is Derek Trucks, as is Billy Gibbons, as was Mark Bolan, as is Jeff Beck, as is Ace Frehley, as was Duane Allman, as is Jimmy Page, as were Gibson themselves in their 1956 catalogue. Now for reference, the Gibson's tunematic bridge and stop bar tailpiece was first introduced in late 1953 on Les Paul Customs. However, it took roughly another 2 years for this to work its way as a feature on every Les Paul, and as such this catalogue from early 1956 is the earliest pictorial evidence I can find of a Gibson catalogue showing the stop bar and the tunematic bridge, and as such could be construed, I guess, as their instruction as to how to string one up. So clearly top wrapping has been around for a while, but why would you do it? Now, the first purported benefit of top wrapping is an increase in sustain. Part and parcel, of course, being of top wrapping to deck your tailpiece, as they call it. Now, what this means, in essence, is getting the tailpiece as close to the guitar as it can physically go by screwing the bolts that hold the tailpiece in place as far as they will comfortably, caveat emptor, as far as they will comfortably go into your guitar. So the theory goes, an increased contact with the body or with the wood of the guitar leads to a more efficient transference of sound and energy equals more sustain through more resonance. Now, if there is an increase in sustain, this also may be due in part to the fact that there is a decreased, quite a drastically decreased break angle over the back of the bridge leading down to the tailpiece, leading to less tension. But I hear you cry, there can't possibly be less tension in the string, because if there was, the string would be tuned to a lower pitch. Now, while it is true to a large extent that the bulk of a guitar string's tension lies between the two pivot points, i.e. the bridge and the nut, there is also resting string tension to consider. Now, a good experiment to show this is when you bend a string, the string actually stretches the length of the string up to and possibly including some of the winds on the tuning peg. And a good way of demonstrating this is to pluck one of the strings above the nut. The G string always makes this fairly apparent. Pluck the string above the nut and then repeat the process, but having bent the same string. You will notice a commensurate increase in pitch, showing that the angle between the nut and the tuning pegs and the angle between the bridge and the tailpiece does affect the string's tension. Now, the science of this is called compliance, and I shall link to an article in the description box which expands on it and explains it in infinitely better, more scientific terms than, quite frankly, I'm ever going to be capable of. Now, the most popularly linked benefit with top wrapping is, as Joe Bonamassa explains in this next clip, making heavier strings feel easier to play, again through decreased tension.
We string them with a top wrap. So these are Ernie Ball 11 to 52s. So it's a pretty heavy string. So in order to make the guitar feel a little bit slinkier and not so difficult to play, we borrow the technique invented by Jimmy Page and Billy Gibbons, which you top wrap over the stud, which lessens the angle over the bridge, so it gets a much nicer, slinkier feel, but it also retains the big heaviness of the strings, so when you hit hard, you're not playing out of tune.
Now, I'm not here to encourage or discourage top wrapping either way, to be honest. You do what is right for you, but all I can do is speak from personal experience. And in the last 2 years or so, since I've been top wrapping some of my Les Paul style guitars, for me at least, whether it's psychosomatic or not, who knows, strings do feel a little bit more pliable and as though there is a little bit less tension in the strings, which, as the above point explains, does make sense. Now, I've done a fair amount of research into this. I actually watched a great YouTube video from Dylan Talks Tone, a luthier in America, which I shall link below, in which he went to the degree of actually measuring the tension on the string when it was top wrapped versus not being top wrapped. And the interesting thing was that his results kind of went against common thought. There was actually more tension in the string when it was top wrapped. Now, as I said, this kind of goes against common thought, but it is interesting to see that either way, there was a scientifically quantifiable difference or measurable difference or discrepancy when the guitar was top wrapped versus not being top wrapped. Despite this, I think the reasons any number of the musicians we've spoken about in this video so far were top wrappers or advocated the technique were probably more practical than they were for any purported benefits in tone or playability. Now, as you can see on Bernie Marsden's 1959 Les Paul The Beast, the bridge has collapsed. Now, that sounds very drastic or a little bit scary. All that means in essence is that years of downward pressure being exerted on the bridge by the strings has caused it to bow very slightly. Now, top wrapping is one way to counteract this and prolong the life of your bridge, because obviously the decreased break angle basically means less tension being exerted on the bridge. You could, of course, try and replicate this by jacking up the tailpiece as you would normally, but in order to replicate that decreased break angle that you get with top wrapping, you would have to jack it up to a fair old height, which, apart from looking a little bit silly, people do swear blind that this has an adverse effect on the guitar's sustain. So, are there any downsides to top wrapping? Yes, ultimately, or bluntly. If you saw the video I did recently on the 1955 Les Paul Gold Top, a guitar where you have no option other than to top wrap, you'll notice the guitar strings going over a tailpiece in time will mark it fairly considerably. It's also worth mentioning that if the saddles on your bridge aren't cut deep enough, the decreased break angle will lead to strings popping out of their saddles, which mid-set or mid-song is incredibly annoying. Some people, it's also worth mentioning, just don't like the difference in feel of top wrap, and also it's worth mentioning that, as Mike Hickey, Joe Bonamassa's guitar tech, explains in this next clip, unless you have an extra ball end on the string, you could be confronted with a situation where the extra winds on the end of a string, which can be fairly sharp, can protrude over the tailpiece and be a little bit sharp on your hand.
So a lot of people like to top wrap the Les Paul, and I was breaking a lot of strings when I first did it, plus I was getting my hand touching the end of the winding, which on the treble strings is often a sharp point. So I wanted to get the winding in further. Well, you've got this end of the winding here, the thicker part of the string, and that can be scraping on your palm. But when I put it through now, and there's another ball end I slide on there, and that pulls the string back just a little, and you see now it's hard to see this, but there's less winding sticking out, so it won't be up where my palm might hit.
Either way, like most things the guitar community loves to get het up over, there's no point in losing any sleep over top wrapping or arguing with strangers about it on the internet. And for every icon I've shown you today that did top wrap at some point, there's another that didn't. It is personal preference and whatever works for you. And of course, if you don't like the feel of it, stick the strings back through the tailpiece. Funnily enough, as Gibson actually imply you should do in the very same catalogue as earlier, on the very next page. Who knows? Who cares? As ever, I'm Chris Buck. You're watching Friday Fretworks. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already. I'll see you next week for another episode. Cheers, guys. Take care, and I'll see you soon.